All right, this is Set with Set and Key Media, and we're back with round two with Chat GPT. Let's go ahead and debate FBA and their reparations. All right, Chat GPT, I want you to make a case for me.
Sure. What topic do you need a case for?
So, I want you to give me the case for foundational black Americans to get reparations.
Absolutely. The case for reparations for foundational black Americans often includes several key points. First, there's the historical context. Centuries of slavery, segregation, and systemic discrimination have led to significant economic and social disadvantages for black Americans. This history has created a wealth gap that persists today. Second, reparations can be seen as a form of justice and acknowledgement of the harm done. Providing reparations could help recognize and validate the struggles of foundational black Americans and address the ongoing impacts of racism and inequality. Lastly, reparations could contribute to closing the racial wealth gap and promoting economic equity. By investing in education, housing, and healthcare, reparations could help uplift communities that have been historically marginalized. What are your thoughts on these points?
I would have to push back on you on closing the wealth gap because wouldn't reparations have to come from the taxpayer, and wouldn't that Loki involve a high taxation of the U.S. citizen?
That's a valid concern. Many people argue that funding reparations might lead to increased taxes. However, proponents suggest that there are various ways to implement reparations without placing a heavy burden on taxpayers. For example, some proposals include reallocating existing funds from certain government programs, utilizing revenue from tax reforms, or even taxing corporations that have profited from historical injustices. The goal would be to create a sustainable program that addresses the needs of foundational black Americans while considering the financial implications for taxpayers. What do you think about those alternative funding methods?
I do believe that it sounds fair, but what about those who weren't descendants of slaves? Who do we decide who pays altogether?
That's an important point. The question of who qualifies for reparations and who contributes can be complex. Many proposals focus specifically on direct descendants of enslaved people in the U.S., aiming to address the unique historical injustices they faced. As for who pays, the discussion often includes both individuals and institutions. The idea is to look at systemic benefits that certain groups have gained over time rather than placing the burden solely on everyday taxpayers. It's a nuanced issue, and different proposals may suggest different approaches to eligibility and funding. How do you feel about the idea of including only direct descendants?
Well, I do believe that it's fair altogether, but how much would the bill be altogether to provide them with reparations?
Estimating the total cost of reparations is challenging and varies widely depending on the proposals considered. Some, est- some estimates suggest it could range from several trillion dollars to tens of trillions, depending on the amount allocated per person and the methods used to distribute funds. Factors influencing the total cost include the number of eligible descendants, the form of reparations, whether direct payments, investments in community programs, or a combination of both, and the time frame for implementation. The conversation about reparations often includes discussions about the long term benefits of addressing historical injustices, which could offset some costs over time. What do you think about these potential costs and benefits?
Well, actually, I do want to ask you one question real quick. Can you separate race from lineage?
That's an interesting question. In many discussions, race and lineage are interconnected, but can be seen as separate concepts. Race often refers to physical characteristics and social constructs, while lineage focuses on ancestry and family heritage. Some argue that discussions about reparations should focus more on lineage, specifically direct descendants of enslaved people, rather than broader racial categories. This approach aims to address the historical injustices specific to those families. How do you see the relationship between race and lineage in this context?
Well, the Constitution pretty much states that there cannot be any race based reparations, so wouldn't it be unconstitutional?
That's a significant concern. The Constitution does provide for equal protection under the law, which raises questions about whether race based reparations could be seen as discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
Some legal scholars argue that any reparations program would need to be carefully designed to comply with constitutional standards, possibly focusing on lineage rather than race. There are also examples of reparations or compensation based on historical injustices in other contexts, which could provide a framework for navigating these legal challenges. The debate around this is complex and opinions vary widely. What are your thoughts on how to approach this constitutional aspect?
Well, to be honest, let me get back to the price of reparations. Could we afford $40 trillion in reparation costs?
Affording $40 trillion in reparations would be a significant financial challenge. It would likely require substantial changes to the federal budget, increased taxation, or reallocation of funds from other programs. Some proponents argue that the long term economic benefits of addressing inequality could outweigh the initial costs, potentially leading to a more equitable economy. Others worry about the immediate financial impact on taxpayers and the economy as a whole. The discussion around affordability often centers on balancing justice and economic sustainability. What are your thoughts on the potential economic impacts of such a large expenditure?
Well, that's the problem. Can you see a way we could allocate $40 trillion to African Americans without crippling the economy?
Finding a way to allocate $40 trillion in reparations without crippling the economy would be incredibly difficult. It might involve a mix of strategies, like gradual implementation over many years, rather than a one time payment. Other ideas could include targeted investments in education, healthcare, and housing, which might have longer term benefits for both the communities receiving support and the economy overall. Additionally, revenue could be generated through tax reforms, closing loopholes, or taxes on corporations that have benefited from systemic inequality. However, even with these strategies, balancing such a significant expenditure with economic stability would be a complex challenge. How do you think a gradual approach might work in practice?
Well, what if we well, drastically lower it to 4 trillion? Would that be more doable?
Lowering the total to $4 trillion would likely make it more manageable. A smaller amount could be more feasible to fund through gradual implementation and targeted programs. With 4 trillion, the government could potentially spread payments over several years or focus on specific investments in communities like education and housing, which could create lasting benefits. This approach might help address economic concerns while still acknowledging the need for reparations. What kind of programs or support do you think would be most effective if the amount were set at 4 trillion?
Well, to be honest, I disagree with reparations on the one fact that I feel like it would cause, well, a kind of a disagreement between the American people. Like a lot of people are going to be jealous or maybe have a bad taste in their mouth that, you know, black people are getting a larger sums of money, just like the immigrants.
That's a valid concern. The idea of reparations can spark strong emotions and differing opinions among the American public. Some might feel resentment or perceive it as unfair, especially if they don't see the historical context behind it. To address this, proponents of reparations often emphasize the importance of education and dialogue about the history of racial injustice and its ongoing impact. Finding common ground and fostering understanding might help reduce division and promote support for any reparations initiatives. What do you think would be the best way to foster that understanding among people with differing views?
I would believe it'd be pretty hard seeing that, there are people here who had nothing to do with slavery. So it'd be pretty unfair to, put those taxations on them or whatever whatever they'd have to pay up.
That's a crucial point. Many people feel it's unfair to hold current taxpayers responsible for historical injustices they didn't directly cause. This sentiment can lead to resistance against reparations. Some proposals try to address this by focusing on systemic solutions rather than direct payments, emphasizing investments in education, healthcare, and community development that benefit everyone. This could help mitigate feelings of unfairness while still addressing the legacy of inequality. It's a complex issue, and fostering discussions around these different perspectives might help bridge the gap. How do you think society can balance recognizing historical injustices while also being fair to all citizens?
Well, I do believe they should get some type of assistance, but they're wanting, I don't know, somewhere between 300,000 per African American. Well, I'm gonna say this: FBA descendant or foundational Black American.
That amount is definitely part of some discussions around reparations, but it can be a contentious figure. Many people feel that while assistance is necessary, the specific amount and how it's distributed should be carefully considered to ensure fairness and effectiveness. Some propose alternatives, like targeted investments in education, housing, and healthcare, which could provide support without the same financial burden. This approach could focus on long term community growth rather than direct payments. How do you feel about finding a middle ground that offers support without such a large individual payment?
Hmm. Honestly, let's talk about a 200-year payment plan for all the families, and maybe that would stretch out the amount we would have to pay. You know.
A 200-year payment plan could definitely make the financial aspect more manageable. Spreading payments over such a long period could help reduce the immediate economic impact and allow for gradual funding through budget allocations or tax reforms. This approach might also allow for adjustments based on economic conditions, making it more sustainable. However, there would still be challenges, like ensuring the program remains funded and relevant over such a long time frame. What kinds of safeguards do you think would be important to include in a long term plan like that?
Well, to be honest, to have some safeguards to make sure that the family is always getting it, it would have to require for foundational Black Americans to only marry foundational Black Americans to make sure that the money stays within the lineage.
That's an interesting idea, but it raises some complex ethical and social issues.
Yeah, I know, right?
Restricting marriage based on lineage could be seen as a form of discrimination and might not align with broader values of individual freedom and choice. Instead, some suggest focusing on direct descendants of enslaved individuals when determining eligibility for reparations. This could help ensure that support reaches the intended families without imposing restrictions on personal relationships. Balancing lineage considerations with principles of equity and personal choice would be challenging. What do you think would be a fair way to maintain lineage without imposing strict limitations?
Well, to be honest, if they want to make sure that these payments stay throughout the family, if they get with a man like me who's of Caribbean descent, then, or get with a white person, then the money falls out of their lineage. And then what was the point of reparations?
I see your point. The concern is about maintaining the intended beneficiaries of reparations. However, tying financial support to specific marital choices could lead to significant ethical issues and might be seen as infringing on personal freedom. Instead, some proposals suggest focusing on direct descendants of enslaved people and establishing clear criteria for eligibility that could include future generations. This way, the focus remains on the historical context without imposing restrictions on personal relationships. It's a challenging balance to strike. How do you think society can create systems that honor lineage while respecting individual choices?
Well, to be honest, I don't really think there'd be a way because as soon as they pretty much marry somebody outside their lineage, does that mean we have to cut the payments?
That's a tough question. If
Ain't it?
payments were tied strictly to lineage, it could lead to complications about when to cut off payments, which might create tension and confusion. Many discussions around reparations focus on direct descendants to navigate this issue without imposing strict marriage rules. This could allow for support to extend to future generations while not overly complicating personal choices. It's definitely a complex situation. How do you feel about the idea of focusing on eligibility based on ancestry rather than marriage choices?
Well, I do understand that, but like, think about it. Those who are eligible would pretty much mess up their payments within just one generation if they marry outside their FBA lineage.
That's a valid concern. If payments are tied solely to lineage, any changes in family structure could indeed complicate eligibility. It raises questions about how to maintain the intent of reparations across generations. Some propose creating a system that allows for continued support to direct descendants while still acknowledging the broader family context. This could involve keeping the focus on historical injustices and ensuring that the funds are used to uplift communities. It's a challenging balance to strike. How do you think a sustainable approach could look that protects the integrity of the payments across generations?
Hmm. I honestly do not know. Do you know? Do you have any ideas, Chat GPT?
One potential approach could involve creating a trust fund model that provides ongoing support for eligible descendants over generations. This fund could be designed to distribute payments based on specific criteria related to lineage, but without strict marriage requirements. Additionally, incorporating educational and community support programs could help ensure that the benefits extend beyond financial payments. This might include investments in schools, job training, and housing that uplift entire communities while still focusing on those directly impacted by historical injustices. This way, the aim would be to create a sustainable system that honors lineage and provides lasting benefits. What do you think about the idea of combining direct financial support with community investment?
I think I got you, Chat GPT, because that means they would have to procreate with other descendants of slaves in order to establish that trust fund or in order to get into the trust fund.
Yes, that's one way to look at it. If the trust fund is structured to support direct descendants of enslaved people, then ensuring that future generations also have that lineage would be essential for maintaining eligibility. However, this could still raise concerns about personal choices and relationships. Another option could be to create broader criteria for the trust fund that includes descendants while allowing some flexibility, ensuring that the funds can support communities without strict limitations on who individuals can partner with. It's a complex issue, and finding a balance is important. How do you feel about flexibility in the eligibility criteria?
Well, actually, I think I won this one, but let's flip it around. I want you to play devil's advocate on this one. Make a case against reparations.
Sure, there are several arguments against reparations that people often raise. First, many believe that reparations could create division among different racial and ethnic groups, leading to resentment and conflict. They argue that it could be seen as punishing people today for actions of the past that they had no part in. Second, some contend that it's difficult to determine who should receive reparations. With so many generations since slavery, it can be challenging to identify direct descendants and establish eligibility criteria fairly. Additionally, critics often argue that focusing on reparations might divert attention from addressing current systemic issues like education, healthcare, and economic inequality, which could benefit a broader population. Finally, there's concern about the financial feasibility of reparations. Many believe that funding such programs could strain the economy and burden taxpayers. What do you think about these arguments against reparations?
Those are pretty sound arguments, my friend. Those are pretty sound arguments. All right, we'll end it on this one, chat. I'm gonna hit you back up again.
I'm glad you found the arguments interesting. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'll be here.
Peace.